Hi, everybody. I'm Tiffany Lesnik, family law and domestic violence attorney, and also survivor of domestic violence and founder of Live Free Legal, where we help women stop being controlled and start being strategic in divorce, custody, and post-separation abuse cases. Today's conversation is an important one. Today, we are talking about overcoming post-separation litigation abuse, because divorce is hard and abuse does not stop after separation. Sorry, I'm like losing my voice here a little bit, and apologize for being a couple minutes late. We were having some technical difficulties. Many women are not prepared for how control continues to escalate after separation and through the separation and divorce process. So before we begin, I want to be clear. This discussion is educational and trauma informed. It is not legal advice. It is not therapy. Family law varies by state. Nothing in today's live creates an attorney-client relationship. If you need specific legal advice, I would encourage you to contact an attorney in your area. Today, I am super excited to be joined by Sharmen Kimbrough. She is the coach and owner of Live Found, and she works extensively with survivors navigating high conflict divorce and post-separation abuse. Sharmen has that presence. I don't know if you ever had the experience of being a kid and being in the library, and you had this soft-spoken librarian who would just read a story to you, and there was just peace that would wash over you because her voice was so soft-spoken and so soothing. That's the way Sharmen is. She just has this presence about her that's peace just washes over you. So I'm really excited to have her on with us today. So Sharmen, thank you so much and welcome. If you would tell everybody a little bit about yourself and about Live Found.
Okay, yeah. I don't know that I've ever had anybody introduce me so graciously like that, which I appreciate. But I don't know what to call, part of my secret weapon is that I'm really a bit of a rebel underneath the soft-spoken surface. So, lived a lot of life trying to figure things out amongst people that are very controlling or coercive or demanding things of me that weren't true to who I am. So, I have learned to walk that out, which is why I founded my business, named it Live Found, because, we spend so much time wandering around lost, dazed, and confused. And so, I think the prerogative of our life, the joy of our life is to find our own footing, to find steadfastness, and to be able to show up in the world being who God created us to be, no matter what the context is. And so everything that I do in my coaching practice has come out of just learning how to walk in that way to find our footing in a world that is very coercive and manipulative and wicked on so many levels. So I actually have spent much of the last 10 years also alongside the Marriage Recovery Center. I'm not actually contracted with them anymore, so I'm doing all my own work through my own practice, but a lot of what I do has drawn from my work there as well with high conflict couples, narcissism, emotional abuse, and all that kind of mess. So that's what I'm bringing to the table today as we talk about just how to navigate the nonsense.
Yes, absolutely. And so where can folks find you?
They can find me. My website is livefound.org, and then I'm on all the social media channels. So Instagram is at livefound, YouTube livefound, Facebook business page livefound. So you can either search for me, Sharmen. There's not a whole lot of Sharmens out there. If you can't figure out how to spell Kimbrough, Sharmen will do. But you can search for Sharmen. You can also search Live Found, and it'll pull up. The websites, the social media sites.
Okay, great. And what kind of services do you provide for women who are going through post-separation abuse? Not necessarily litigation
Mhm,
abuse, but just post-separation abuse in general. But I think it's
mhm.
confounded when you've got the legal process involved as well.
Oh, totally. So really the motivation behind what I do at Live Found is really identity work. So it's finding your footing, whatever it is you're dealing with. And so the services we have, I have a coach that works with me, Lauren Rose, and we both provide one-on-one sessions if people like individual work. But I also have some really powerful group programs using a workbook that I compiled, a 16-week group program specifically for women just trying to find their footing and doing it together in community when so much of their story has been in isolation, where they have no room, no place, no ear to hear otherwise what they're dealing with.
Right, right. Yeah, and we know that abuse thrives in isolation, and that's why
Mhm.
community is so important, surrounding yourself
Exactly.
with other women who have been through what you've been through, or supportive people who can help you through the process. And that's particularly important when you are going through the legal process after abuse. And so I mentioned in the intro, abuse does not stop once you've separated. Many of my clients want to pacify the abuser. They'll get maybe a settlement offer or a separation agreement.
Mm.
They're pushed or, almost coerced to sign this now. If you sign this now, I'll leave you alone. You'll finally have that peace that you want. And it's that push, that push, that push, that pressure. And that's a fallacy, right? His behavior
Mhm.
after separation is not going to be any different than it was during the marriage, right? He is manipulating and he is lying about the fact that if you sign this now, or if you do this now, his abusive behavior is going to stop. What we usually see is an escalation of abusive behavior through the legal process. And so that's kind of one of the first questions I want to talk about is, why does going through the legal system feel so traumatic after
Mm.
leaving an abusive relationship?
I think a big reason is because there's clearly been an awakening to how destructive things have been. To actually go through a divorce process, there's been an awakening that just making sense of some of the nonsense. And with that awakening, there's also the divorce is meant to bring some closure to it so that you don't have to still deal with it. And when you're dealing with someone who loves coercive control, then they're never going to be relational oriented. They're always power oriented. And so utilizing whatever the system is at the moment to still evoke that kind of control over the people around them, it's going to happen. So you have an awareness of that. What makes it so hard is what gets amped up is belittling you, making you small, devaluing everything you've contributed to the relationship, coupled with juxtaposed to there's this like there should be freedom on the other side. Why isn't it coming? And so that makes it extra hard.
Yeah, and I think there's also the pressures with deadlines. You've
Mhm.
have mediation scheduled, or you have a trial that's coming up. There's also this enormous amount of pressure that women feel because their financial future is at risk. They're having to make huge decisions that maybe they weren't allowed to make previously. They're having to make huge financial and economic decisions that they were not a part of during the marriage. And there's a lot of fear in that because they don't know what type of impact those decisions are going to have on their future, on their children's future. And many times through the legal process, you're not given a lot of space or time to be able to thoroughly process and think through those decisions. You might be in a mediation and you need to make a decision right now, this day,
Right.
or you have a trial in a week. And so you've got 1 week to process. And coupled with that, there is this emotional component, right? You're mourning the loss, mourning a significant loss of this marriage and relationship that you wished would have been, even though it wasn't, right? You wished would have been loving, which you wished would have been safe, would have been
Mhm.
permanent. So you're mourning the loss of everything, the death of this relationship, this marriage, this dream that you had for your children, as you're also having to make these very, very difficult decisions, and many times a time compressed manner. And I think that just feels that feels so
Mhm.
stressful and so
Yep.
overwhelming for women.
Yep. Yeah,
And then
the
you
grief is
have,
huge.
right. And you mentioned the key word too, the control and the power differential. You know, him coming in and filing a lawsuit against you, now you have all these other players involved. You've got lawyers, you've got judges, you've got mediators. So now you have all these other people with power,
Mhm.
that also make you feel so small, and make you feel like
Yep.
you have even less control. And
Right.
so let's talk about some strategies that we can use to help us make better decisions, feel more grounded as we're going through this process. And I recognize now as an attorney, I mean, I'll share this personal story. When I first left my abuser, so I'm a survivor of domestic violence. When I first left my abuser, I was going through law school, and he had filed, well, actually, I can't remember if I had filed the action or he had filed the action, but we were in court. And I remember feeling how overwhelming that was. Court dates were being scheduled without my knowledge. I was trying to manage two children on my own as a single parent. I was trying to study for finals. And there were times, I made choices that were the best that I could in those moments for me.
Right. Right.
But I felt very overwhelmed. And in hindsight, I wish I had not made the choices I had, but it's okay, right? You're
Mhm.
at is where you're at. You do the best with what you can. But it was very traumatic and very overwhelming for me going through that as a law student and a survivor. And I see women that I work with now going through this process and recognize how traumatic going through the legal system is. So, back to the question. So, what are some things that we can do to help reduce the reactivity or
Mm.
regulate our emotions as we're going through this process?
I think, some of the most common ones are things like grounding yourself, meditating, making sure you're doing enough introspective work to pay attention to what's going on in your own self. Because if you're managing what's going on in your own self, it actually helps you to feel a little bit more in control, even though you're not able to manage the outcomes of what's going on. It's just you are the only one that manages you, actually. You're the only one that controls you. And so taking that seriously, it actually has that additional benefit of helping you to feel a little bit more steadfast when you're in a totally uncontrollable situation. But yeah, the meditation, the speaking truth over yourself, having a coach or a counselor or a very wise mentor speak into you can help be the buffer from the chaos around you.
And so how can a coach help you
Mm.
with, I guess we'll
Mm.
call it like nervous system regulation?
Mhm. I have an exercise that I do with my groups. I start like every single group meeting, I start with this check-in. So give me a number between 1 and 10. What's your internal environment like right now? Like just give me a number of what's going on inside, with 1 being awful. You want to crawl into a hole and die. 10 is awesome. Like today just you're just on top of the world, right? Give yourself a number in there and talk a little bit about why you gave yourself that number. The practice of that is checking in with your own self, because so often what happens is we abandon ourselves to the nonsense, just trying to shut the nonsense down, trying to find a place of peace out there without really recognizing like what the number is in us. And I do actually have a whole worksheet to better identify how to pick a number, because so many people are like, I don't even know. On one hand, I'm a 0. On the other hand, I'm 7.5. It can't be just a whole number somewhere. So I actually do have a whole worksheet on how to identify that, and then have some tips for what to do. Like if you're at a I always tell people if you are under a 5, so five's kind of in the middle. If you are any number under a 5, it is worth doing some self-care, whatever that might look like. What do you need? Are you hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stressed? Well, that's the acronym HALT the BS, right? So hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stressed. Fix whatever one of those things are. That might just bump you up a number, or whatever it might be. The more you're paying attention to your own internal environment, you can put yourself up. Anything over a 5, I think, is good. I love it when people can sit at a 7 or an 8 even, because I don't think we can always be a 10, but some people are. I don't know, but
Mm.
that's just a practical thing to do because we abandon ourselves so often.
Yeah, absolutely. We do. And I say to myself and to my clients, sometimes it's okay just to stop. Like if
Yeah.
you're in the middle of something and you are just feeling overwhelmed, it's okay just to say, you know what? I'm stopping for a moment and I'm going
Mhm.
to breathe. I'm going to walk outside. I'm going to get a cup of tea. I'm going to do whatever I need to do in this moment just to like regulate, right? Let some peace wash over me. I don't need to make every decision right this second. I don't need
Exactly.
to solve
Yep.
every problem right this second. It's
Mhm.
okay to slow down and stop. Um,
Yep.
why do you think we become, so we use the word reactive, we use that word in the abuse community, and I think that's a response to abuse, right? We
Mhm.
become very
Trauma
emotional,
response. Mhm.
right? Why do you think the nervous system reacts so intensely um, in the context of, let's talk about mediation. So if a woman
Mm.
has to go through mediation, and many times mediation is required,
Mhm.
when she's going through the legal process, it's not optional many times. What are some things that she could do in mediation to kind of help self-soothe or regulate when she's in that environment?
Mhm. I One of the things that I knew I had to do, which I imagine is helpful for others as well, is I wrote down exactly what my lines were, what my own requests were going to be, the things I wasn't gonna cross, like my absolutes. I wrote them down. And when I had to go into mediation, I had them in front of me and I had a general idea. I mean, a lot of people don't have a general idea of what their spouse is going to do, but I had a general idea of what my ex was going to be asking for. And so just having it down, written in front of me, enabled me to stay present in the conversation, knowing I had it saved right in front of me what my lines were. I didn't have to try to hold it in my head. So that was just one way of, strengthening my position, so to speak, and helping me to have some room to think through in the moment, how to respond better to him. But I think, that's helpful if you can have someone be with you, like, just to bear witness of the whole thing. They don't have to add anything else, just to bear witness of it. That's super helpful as well. And, yeah, keep in mind that even in that moment of mediation or even a court, when you're sitting in court, that is just a moment in time. It's not about the end of your life. It's not like something set in stone forever. It's just a moment in time. And so getting through that moment in time like you would anything else, not as a um, survivor, not just trying to survive the moment, but thinking through, how do I be steadfast here? How do I hold fast to truth? How do I say what I need to say? And being really present to do that does a lot, again, just for your own nervous system, internal systems and all that, but also to bring an atmosphere to the environment that kind of gets off-putting to the person who's used to pushing all your buttons and watching you end up in a heap on the floor.
Right. No, absolutely. And when you're in the mediation context, what I would also recommend as an attorney is, again, it's okay to take a break. It's okay to
Mhm.
say, as the mediator, I need you to step out of the room, or
Mm.
I need to step out of the room. I need to go outside and take a walk, or I'm not prepared to make this decision right now. There might be putting a
Mhm.
lot of pressure on you. Like, you've got to agree on this now, or he's going to walk, or he's going to change his mind. And you're really not sure that this is the right decision. And you feel very unsettled about it. It's okay to not sign on the dotted line that day. Um, it's okay not to make that decision. It's okay to
Mhm.
set boundaries for yourself,
Yes.
even when you feel unsure. So
Yep.
just know that you have power, in these situations, in the legal context, to set boundaries for you, which can help you with that. So you talked
Mhm.
about being in the courtroom setting. So I want to go to that for a minute. Um, let's talk about why survivors sometimes feel the need to over explain. And then I'm going to relate that back to like the courtroom setting.
Mhm. I think, first of all, the biggest reason is when you're in a coercively controlling relationship for long enough, you come to a place where, and I think a lot of it's subconscious, but y you have to prove to this person that you're worth, that you have something valuable, that you're worth showing up in their life, and so that comes to a point where you're explaining everything. You feel like you have to have your own court case about every single thing that you do to prove your value, to prove your right to speak. And I think that carries over into the courtroom as well. Plus, there's that element that, honestly, if there was a better understanding of what was going on, there could be a better resolution. And when we see the lies being thrown around or things being distorted or, whatever it is, there's that um, defensive part of us that's like, if you're not going to tell the truth, we can never fix anything. And so that
Mhm.
leads into trying to over explain as well.
Right. And I think a lot of times we want to defend the lies, right? I
Hmm.
loved your tip about writing things down. Like, write it
Hmm.
down before you go into mediation or before you go into court.
Yep.
We need to understand or know that he is going to lie, right? He is going to continue to abuse. He is going to continue to say hurtful, untruthful things about us, even in the legal context, even on the stand, even in even in mediation. There needs to be an expectation that that is going to happen, so that when it does
Yeah.
happen, we're not surprised by it, right? We can say, I knew that was coming, right? I have it. I wrote it down. Here it is on my
Hmm.
sheet. There it is. I knew, and then we don't have to be overwhelmed or surprised by it because we expected it. Um,
Exactly.
the other thing that I always tell my clients to do is that you need to write down like your top 3 to 5 objectives. Like, what is most important to you? What are you hoping to achieve? Right. And write that down and bring that with you as well, so that you are not losing sight and you're not going down a rabbit hole with him when he starts testifying to things that are not true, that you don't become overly communicative or try to over explain things, because you can say, you know what, this has nothing to do with my objectives today. Like, I care about custody. I don't care about his accusations about X, Y, and Z. So I don't
Mm.
need to get up on the stand and try to over explain all of these things, because that's not meeting my objectives. Um, but I do agree with you. And I love the comments that you made, right? We're constantly in a courtroom trying to explain our truth to our abuser during our marriage. And so I think there is that tendency to want to over explain when we get into a courtroom setting. And I also think that I think when we finally come out as survivors, we want the truth to finally be known, right?
Right. Yep.
Like,
Justice.
we've lived in silence for so long. We've covered for him. We've covered for the abuse and made excuses for him, and so we are finally speaking our truth and we want our truth to be known. And so we have a tendency to want to tell our entire story. And
Mhm.
sometimes well, not sometimes, the majority of the time or most of the time, the legal process or the courtroom is not the place for us to do that, right? It's not a
Right.
therapeutic process. And so how could a divorce coach help with that? Help teach you to tell your story or help you in telling your story?
Mhm. I think I think it would be two-pronged. One aspect of that would be helping put words to it in a way that's gonna be meaningful for a court process, which are gonna be shorter words, more direct asks, but rather than explanations. So the court's all about trying to decide who gets what, essentially. So it's about the asks. It's about what you are willing to settle for, so to speak. Whereas the process behind the scenes for your own self is to write it out much more thoroughly so that you can put words to your own story, even if it's just for your own self. Like one of the questions we have here, one of the comments we have here says, I sometimes have trouble knowing what other people will recognize as unreasonable, and then also have trouble prioritizing what is important. That's to my point. The first one is we have to be able to identify truth without running it through the grid of what other people might find reasonable. We have to start first with what's going on in us, being able to name it. And when you can name what's going on in you, who you are, how you want to show up in the world, how you know God is speaking to you, what resonates as true in you, and put that into words, it automatically prioritizes what is important. And instead of running it through the grid of what other people find reasonable, because I will tell you there are more unreasonable people in the world than there are reasonable. So don't use them as the lens. Um, look, look for truth. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, wisdom is supreme, though it costs everything you have, gain understanding. And so learn to become a discerner of truth for yourself, which means, what other people are saying, what they're giving you, what you're reading, what you're following, that's information. Information isn't of itself truth. And so wrestling with it, what is true? The Holy Spirit in you will tell you what is the truth. It will resonate in you as the truth. And then that becomes the foundation from which you answer both questions: how you show up in court and what you ask for, what you stand on, and then how you show up for your own self, which becomes the you that you bring to every other relationship you have. And I don't mean marriage relationship, dating, I mean every relationship, every person in your circle of influence.
Right. That's awesome. And we have a couple of comments. Your reminder about it being just a moment in time was so helpful to one of the ladies in
Mm,
our audience. She says it's so easy to worry about all the what ifs and uncertainties in the
mhm,
future, right? There was another woman that I spoke with. She was at the Call to Peace conference. She's actually one of the speakers at the Call to Peace conference, and she
mm,
talked about going through a divorce. And she talked about God pretty much took everything. Like she lost
mm,
everything. She lost her business.
mhm,
She lost all of her assets. She lost all of her wealth, everything. And in that moment, she just really didn't know what to do. But she just said, "Okay, God, it's all yours anyway."
mhm,
And she
mhm.
just gave it all back to Him, and He multiplied what she had previously, tenfold, because He had plans for
Wow.
her to do something
Yeah.
completely different in her life and the plans to prosper her. And it was like a Job moment for her. So yes. And I'll tell my clients too. I don't say this is just a moment in time, but I usually say something like, by the time it's lunchtime, you'll be having lunch and this will be over. Or by the time it's dinner time,
Oh, yeah.
it'll
Keeping
be
it more
it'll
in the
be
moment.
over. Yeah, it's just a moment in time. So do keep that in
Yep,
mind. And God's got
yep,
this, right?
yeah, yep. It's the story you're in, and we're not done living the story till we're dead, and there's gonna be a lot of moments that are, like, really, really hard, but if we get hung up on, sorry, if we
Uh-oh.
get hung up on the landing points, like, sorry, I'm gonna take a drink for just a
Oh, it's
second.
okay. Here, I'll talk for you. I actually just got over
Okay.
like bronchitis. And if you need to
Mm,
step away from the screen for a few minutes, that's fine too. I had those coughing spells that were just, just
yeah,
horrible.
no, I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, if we get hung up on those moments, if I can just land with the divorce done, if I can just land with the new love in my life, if I can just land with the job and like these touch points of security, if I could just land there, then it's the Disney story, happily ever after. Like, can breathe in. But the reality is, life, we are not landed until we are eye to eye with God. So being able to look at like we have a sense of direction. We have the longings and the hopes and the dreams, and those are so valuable to hold on to as a sense of direction. But life is lived in the moments, one step at a time. And so the don't get so hung up on the landing point. Put more energy and awareness into how are you taking your steps in this journey? What are you learning from it? What is
Hmm.
God teaching you?
Yeah. And I know I used to be in a place in my life where I would get so hung up on, God, is this your will? And I couldn't make a decision until I
Mm,
felt like I absolutely heard from him, like, yes, this is the direction I want you to go in. And I would just be paralyzed by overanalyzing, and
mhm,
I've gotten to a point now where I'm like, God, you are so big, right? That no matter what I decide, even if I don't have the right discernment and I make the wrong decision, you're going to fix whatever I break,
mhm.
right? Or if I
I
go
think
down the
it's
wrong
even
path, you're going to auto correct my path and get me back on course. So,
yeah, I think it's even bigger than that. I mean, we talk about it in terms like that as if God is on the fly correcting us and directing our paths. He's already got the whole story written. And so, yes, we have the the God-given right and responsibility to choose our steps and to learn and to grow. That is, again, the prerogative of the human journey. And the reality is, he already knows the whole story.
right.
So it's when we talk about making the wrong choice or the right choice, I usually reframe it for people the foolish choice versus the wise choice. But when we talk about that, like that's us in our own minds trying to choose our steps. But, God's not up there going, "No, no, no. Oh, great. Someone give me a plan B because she just screwed it all up." Like, there's none of that going on. And so, yeah, having that awareness that no matter what choice you make, you're not gonna screw up God's sovereignty over your life. And so being able to hold on to, He holds my times in His hands no matter what choice I make. So I can let my heart rest in that while I still wrestle out this decision because I do want to be wise rather than a fool.
Right. No, exactly. And certainly, if we have love for the Father, we're wanting to please him, right, with our decisions and our choices and the what we do with our lives, as a reflection of him. So I think that's just part of being in relationship with him, just like any
Mhm.
child with a parent, right? Wanting to please that parent.
Yep.
But yeah, I've definitely gotten to a point now where it's like, okay, it's okay for me to step out in faith. I'm taking that step. And then God's
Mhm.
the author of my steps as I move forward. And I think that's the same thing in the legal context, right? We're taking these steps forward that are sometimes unknown and sometimes really scary. And we have to remember that God's with us through that process too, right? And
Mhm.
so that can help kind of guide you when you're trying to make these big decisions, even if
Yeah.
um, you're uncertain about that decision. It's going to work out the way it needs to work out or the way God intended it to work out. So Renee says, I sometimes have trouble knowing what other people will recognize as unreasonable and also have had trouble prioritizing what is
Mm.
important. Do you have any tips for that comment? So having trouble
Yes.
recognizing or having trouble knowing what other people will recognize as unreasonable and prioritizing what is important.
Mhm. Yeah, I touched on that one just a minute ago as well, but I think, um, again, taking off that filter of what we think other people are thinking. So running it through the grid of what other people think is reasonable puts too much pressure on ourselves to, one, read other people's minds, and it's an assumption that everyone's going to think the same, right? And so this is your story. This is your space. This is you trying to figure out what your steps are going to be. And so your first and foremost question needs to be what is reasonable to you. That's how you live within your own boundaries. And so answering the question, how do you recognize that? You could do things like starting with that exercise of giving yourself a number. That's a way of looking within to go, what is really going on in me? And um, I think coupled with that, I have a lot of people that are like, they get so hung up on trying to decide, is this abuse? Is this narcissism? Is this emotional control? And at some point, I look at them and say, does your body tell you this is awful?
Mhm.
Like, let's start there before you feel like you have to call that something before you give any credence whatsoever to what's going on in your own self. Like, at the end of the day, I don't care what you called any kind of destructive behavior. If it's destroying your soul, something's wrong and it
Right.
needs to be talked about.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's an awesome point. And I wanted to talk about the cost of being reasonable with an unreasonable person, since we're talking about unreasonable
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
Many survivors try to be cooperative with an abuser to de-escalate things, and I kind of mentioned this earlier. Um, how how can that backfire?
Mm.
Or what do you see happening in your work that you do with survivors
Mhm.
when they try to be cooperative or they try to be reasonable with an unreasonable person?
I think it keeps them stuck in the loops in their head about their own capacity to be reasonable, to think or to make sense of things because they're trying to understand why, for example. I tell people all the time, answering the why question is never going to be satisfactory with someone who makes zero sense. You cannot make sense of nonsense. And so, you know, there is that getting stuck in that loop. But answering why. And so I forgot where I was going with the rest of that question, but um
I do that sometimes
yeah.
too. Well, and I think this goes back to something I said before about we know he's going to behave like this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Abusers, coercive controllers are unreasonable by nature. And many of my clients will sit in my office and say, why? Repeatedly. Why does he do this? Why does he say this? Why is this happening? And I'm like,
Yeah.
we don't need to be asking this question, right?
Yeah. So
This is a known. It's because of who he is. And
exactly.
it's going to continue. So we can predict this is going to continue. So now we can plan for what to do
Yep.
next, right?
Yeah. So that's an easy distraction that keeps people stuck. Um, where else it backfires to be so reasonable? I know that a big piece of it is that um, they already feel crazy. And so, in trying to mitigate how crazy they feel, they will show up trying to be extra reasonable because they don't want an additional layer on top of that that you looked crazy in the court because you were adamant about standing up for what you wanted to stand up for. And so they want to be reasonable on that and they just want it to be done. So the expectation being if the more reasonable I can be, the quicker this will be done and I can move on with my life. But they will end up settling for emotionally or in the court, they will end up settling for way less than they should have to. In a lot of ways, it's really detrimental to them. They're already losing so much of their sense of self and sense of direction. And then to lose all that other stuff, just because they're trying to be reasonable, which honestly, at the end of the day, it might not matter if they're reasonable or not. It might not matter. But being too reasonable is to still abandon oneself for the sake of someone else who has no intention whatsoever of honoring that self. You give an inch, they'll take a mile. So no matter how reasonable you are, there is always one more thing that they
Right.
will demand of you then. And at the end of the day, you have no energy left. You end up in despair.
Right, right. And I'm not suggesting that you never are reasonable, right? Again, set your
Mm.
goals and objectives for yourself. And if you're
Mhm.
fulfilling or acquiring those goals and objectives, absolutely. We don't want to be
Mhm.
extremely difficult because we don't want to appear in court like we say no to everything. We don't want to do that.
Mhm.
I think what some suggestions would be for not making concessions with an unreasonable person. For example, if he says, I'm just going to get 50-50 custody anyway, why don't we just agree to 50-50? Will you at least consider it? That's not the time to put in a text message, okay, I agree, or okay, I'll
Mm.
consider it, because then he can use that against you, right? You're
Ah,
trying to look cooperative and you're putting things in writing that he could maybe use against you later. So that would be an example of when not to maybe try to negotiate or be reasonable with an unreasonable person. Maybe he puts forward a settlement agreement that is completely one sided, right? He's taking all of his retirement, he's taking all of the savings. You're not getting very many of the assets. And he's like, you need to just be reasonable. I earned all of it. You stayed at home, you didn't earn any of it, so you just need to agree to this, right? That would not be a reasonable way for you to, it would not be reasonable for you to say, sure, I'll just accept this, right? I'll just take
right.
nothing. You had
Mhm.
contributions to the marriage and you were entitled to an economic advantage at the end of the day. So those are the kind of things we're talking about. When he's making unreasonable demands on you, that's not the time to say, I want to look like the fair person, right? I'm willing to
Yep.
concede because I just want it to be fair, or I just want it to be over with, or I just want to be the good Christian wife, or I just want to look like the good Christian person. Um, so that's what we're talking about there. So
Mhm.
we
Yeah.
absolutely want to do everything with excellence as
Yes.
women who are a reflection of Christ, but then we don't want to be
Mhm.
extra difficult by being
Yep.
unreasonable. But just know who you're negotiating with, I guess is the point there.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. You're negotiating with someone who puts no value on what you have brought to the table. And so, yeah, that's worth looking at. He might be trying to come across as being very reasonable and then talking you out of what could rightfully be yours, but it's in a way that it discounts everything you brought to the table.
Yeah. And we had another comment. Her ex gave her two powerful statements. Not my problem was one of them that he
Mm,
would say to her repeatedly, and then trying to engage.
okay. I like
Yeah.
that.
hmm So that brings me to another topic that I wanted to bring up, awareness of options. Like, how important
Mm,
is it to know about what our actual options are
mhm.
before urgency makes decisions for you?
Y just kind of as a side note, what's so powerful about that is when you're in a coercively controlling relationship, you end up feeling like there are 0 options for anything. And so it is actually really important to be able to look at options, to think outside the box. That's part of my definition of resilience is being able to see outside the box, think outside the box, and look for options or make them when you can't see them. They're not obvious in front of you. We always have options. on an emotional level. We always have options for how we choose to think about things, how we choose to respond, what we choose to believe internally. Like there's always messages coming into our head about our own value or worth or sense of direction or, whatever the things are. We do have options about what we do with all of that stuff. And the more we give ourselves permission to evaluate the options and choose the ones that work for us, the more we give ourselves permission to do that there internally, emotionally, the more we'll be able to step into options on a judicial scale, so to speak,
Mhm. Mhm.
that they're defined differently there, but we can step into them more with again greater steadfastness. That's a word I like to use. A greater emotional steadfastness because we know that we can be resilient, we can be creative. We're not just stuck on what people tell us to do, and we have choices here. The manipulation is only manipulation when you give up your right to choose. Otherwise, it's just a bully being
Yeah.
a bully.
Yeah. And I think it's so important in the legal context to understand what your options are. Knowledge is power. So
Mhm,
if you know going into that mediation or going into those negotiations, right? Here's what my actual legal rights are, what my legal options are. Here's what the numbers are, right? Here's what the financials say. It's important to, if you have an attorney, to set up a meeting with your attorney before going into mediation. So you know what you're going to be asking for. You know what the options are before you go to trial, that you're prepared, right? That your attorney has gone over the evidence with you, that you've gone over some of the questions, that you know what your attorney is wanting you to testify to. I think knowing what the options are and being prepared is going to go a long way to reducing the amount of discomfort and
mhm,
stress and fear and anxiety that you're going to experience. Preparedness is so important. Apart from being legally prepared, like financially and working with your attorney and all of that, are there some other tips that you can give to the ladies out there about just basic things that they could do
mm,
that will help bring them calm
mhm,
before a storm?
mhm. To be a seeker of the truth, right? So that's a big thing. And really what I'm talking about is in your own head. Again, like I was just saying a minute ago, the messages that we get in our own head about our identity, our worth, our value, what our rights are, especially in the context as well of wrestling with what it means to be a godly woman, a godly wife. We have to really unpack the things that we've been taught that actually make us small and silence the voice of God in our soul. Like, that is not what God asks us to die to silencing his voice in our soul. And so finding people who can speak, breathe that life into you. God has something he is trying to speak to your soul to keep it alive, even in this context. You have identity, worth, and value not because of the situations. You have to break those soul ties of the situation being your identity. That's not your identity. It's just the context that you're living in. And so things like that, it feels like a huge mind game in a lot of ways, but it's, how often does scripture talk about telling yourself what to think? Right? It's exactly that. Managing the messages in your head so that you're being a seeker of the truth. And when you have truth to operate from, it tells you what your options are. It tells you what your rights are. It shows you where your strength is. It gives you a sense of direction. There's so much about that in and of itself that gives you the wherewithal to be able to navigate the horror of the situation.
Hmm. And that leads to another point that I wanted to talk about: it identity
Mm,
preservation, because divorce from a coercive person often erodes identity. What practices can women engage in to help keep them connected to who they are while the legal process is stripping things away? Um,
mm.
And I'll let you think on that for a minute, because I was just
Mhm.
even thinking about how in the legal process, we're not even identified many times by our names, right? It's plaintiff, defendant,
Oh.
petitioner,
Mm.
respondent, dependent spouse, supporting spouse, um, co-parent. There's a file number. You start the case by
Mhm.
reading aloud the file number, 21 CVD, blah, 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 blah. So there's so many dehumanizing terms, and it's such an adversarial process. So you're coming out of a relationship that's already been so demoralizing, so dehumanizing, and then we're back into
Mhm.
a system, an adversarial system that feels the same way. So what can we do to stay connected to who we truly are as daughters of the Most High King?
I think that is where a lot of prayer and meditation, walking with God really becomes so vital. And it's not a simple, just pray more and wait for God to step in sort of thing. It's the lifeline. I remember having a whole seasons where I couldn't pray a lot of things, but the only words I could utter much of the time was, God have mercy on me. Like, I know I got to pick up my foot. I don't know where it's going down. Just lead me, guide me, hold me, those kinds of things when I didn't have the wherewithal myself to hold it all together, just relying on that. And, um, I think that's a foundational part of it. But um, finding a circle, even that if that circle is just one or two people that can be speaking truth to you, not just what you want to hear, but constantly reminding you of what is true. That's
Mhm.
so helpful because again, this is just a moment in time. It's it's a season of the life that you're in. At some point it will be done. At some point you will feel different. Like you're not always going to feel whatever it is you're feeling at the moment. It eventually will be done. And so in the what do you do in the moment? Well, tap into the God who promises that his strength is made perfect in your weakness. I think it puts a whole new twist on what that verse really means. He is your shield and your defender. Like
Yeah.
really sitting in the things that say, God, no matter what happens, I do trust that my times are still in your hands, even when all hell breaks out here, even
Mm.
when I don't see the redemption or the justice or the recompense. I my soul will fracture if I don't just sit in knowing that you are God and you hold my times in your hands. So, I think that's again just that's a basic thing. Um, but otherwise, yeah, simple processes of staying attuned to what is going on in your own heart does a lot each and every day to help you take the steps that you need to be steadfast and wise and thoughtful and not get so lost in the story that you abandon yourself over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just had a thought and it went out of my now it went out of my head. Oh, I know what it was. I do the legal coaching groups for women going
Mm,
through post separation abuse. And one of the things we've been talking about the last couple weeks is surrounding ourselves with a support team. Right. And that can look like a lot of different people. That can be friends, neighbors, family, domestic violence advocates. It can be divorce coaches, legal professionals, babysitters, right? We have practical
mhm,
needs too, like
mhm,
getting a good babysitter to help you with childcare, or maybe someone who to help you with transportation. So surrounding yourself with folks who are going to help fill you up when you feel really
mhm,
drained. And a therapist. Therapists are so important as well to help you when you're feeling like I'm not sure that I'm thinking clearly about this, because he's still going to try to
mhm.
get in your head and mess with your thoughts, right? So
Yep.
people who you can double check, right? Am I thinking clearly about this, or is he in my head? And I'm not making the clearest decisions right now. So you need to surround yourself with community. We are not meant to do things in isolation, and that can absolutely be a very helpful way to help us feel more grounded and more supported as we walk through. One more thing to talk about real quick. We're just about out of time. How does someone protect credibility while they're being attacked through the legal process? And I have my legal feel for that, but I don't know if you have anything you want to contribute.
What I usually contribute is, I think it's 1 Peter 2:15 that says, "It's God's will that you continue to do good so that you silence the ignorant talk of foolish men." So if there's people out there that need a Bible verse to hold on to, I I will admit, I think it's taken out of context just a little bit, but the truth, the tenet of it is truth to hold on to. That God asks us to step into what he has right in front of us to do. That's the good he has for us to do. And he's more inclined to watch how you show up, who are you in that space, than he is about like all the things that we get hung up on. What is God's will for my life? Like, who do I marry? The job, all that kind of stuff. He cares about who you are. And so being able to take a verse like that, and, okay, God's will for me, it's God's will that you do what? You do the good he put right in front of you to do. So what is that good? I'm going to show up in that and let my life be my testimony. Sometimes that's going to mean setting the record straight. No, Your Honor, this is actually what I said or what I did or what kind of person I am. But other times it's going to mean letting whoever misspoke about you have to argue in their own head about what they believe about you, because they're not looking to understand you, right? If they're making accusations or they're condemning you or whatever, it's not about looking to understand you. And so it would be foolish to try to put any other truth out there. They're not looking for it. A fool scoffs at rebuke. A fool scoffs at the truth. And so, yeah, being able to walk wisely in that regard looks like, again, knowing the truth for yourself, being able to walk in that, and then letting your life be the testimony, even if people aren't seeing it rightly. It's not our job to make people see correctly. It's our
Right.
job to show up.
What was that verse? I want to put it in the chat. So
Oh, I think it's 1 Peter 2:15.
2,
Yeah.
2 what?
2:15.
2:15. Okay, we think
Yeah.
it's that one.
Yeah.
It's
I think so.
First Peter. Go look
And
in First Peter, see if you can find
yeah,
that. That's a good one.
and not the King James version, because it's not nearly as, it doesn't carry the same punch as I think New International Version or New American Standard.
Yeah. And what I'll say about protecting your credibility from a legal standpoint when you're being emotionally attacked, right? So he's up there, he's lying, he's saying things that are not truthful. That's where your documentation and your evidence are so important. So be organized, be prepared, make sure you're documenting, you're collecting your evidence. So download those text messages, print out those emails. If you're in a state where you can record, have those audio recordings, keep journals, calendars, take photographs, right? Document while you're going through this process, because when it comes down to a he said, she said, and the judge is trying to discern the truth, the documentation is where that truth is really going to reveal itself. So that is one way that you can combat the lies and maintain your credibility. I think we started out this conversation, and we're going to be ending here in just a minute, but we started out this conversation talking about the importance of regulation, right? Being well regulated when you testify so that you look calm, you look credible, is also extremely important, because if you get up on the stand and you're a hot mess express, and you're all over the place and you're very emotional, then the judge is more likely to side with him if he's up there really calm and charismatic. Okay, so very important. Regulation, critical. So go check out Sharmen at livefound.org. See how she can help you with regulation skills and being more grounded as you go through this process. Sharmen, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It's been so helpful.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Anytime. And I want to close with this. If you are navigating divorce from someone who uses control, delay, intimidation, or emotional destabilization, you are not weak and you are not dramatic and you are not imagining it. Okay. But you need to understand family court is not a truth tribunal and it is not therapy and it does not award emotional transparency. It rewards credibility and it rewards steadiness and steadfastness. Okay. There is consistency over time, and that's why regulation becomes strategy. So, regulation is so important. You're not going to be able to out argue your abuser. They're expert at that, right? But you can outlast them and you can out prepare them as well. You can refuse to you can refuse to abandon yourself in the process. And that is what this platform is about. If this conversation has resonated with you today, here's what I want you to do. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss future live conversations. We do a live every month. Share this stream with another woman who may be navigating high conflict divorce. And if you need to dive deeper, check us out at livefreelegal.com or check out Sharmen at livefound.org. We are so glad that you joined us today. Again, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and share this with another woman who needs it. Thanks, everybody. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, ladies.